Thank you all for coming. We're going to go ahead and get started. I hope everybody's had their coffee and scones, ready to tackle the day. And we're going to start with, we're going to have Kim Oliver, the director of the Department of Families, Children, Youth, and Recreation, come up and introduce Mayor Bronin.
Hi.
My name's J.C. McCoy.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Well, good morning. I am so excited to be here today as we continue this very important topic about disrupting the cradle to prison pipeline. So thank you so much for taking the time today to spend with us and really being committed and being willing to take action as a result. Today's event is part of a series of events that we started last year at the City of Hartford in partnership with many of you. And we started it because we thought it was really important for us to look at the entire continuum from prenatal to age 24 and really think about how could we move the needle forward on something that's really important. The other thing that was really important to me is when I came to the city, I was very fortunate that I had a combination of experiences that reminded me how connected all of our work is and how connected we all are. Because when we talk about issues of families, issues around children, everything is connected. So for some of you, you may know that for years, I did work around disconnected young people, out of school youth. And one of the things that I was able to do was really part of a network, a national network that was headed by Aspen. And the Aspen Institute brought us all together and really talked about how could we build momentum and really transform lives for our younger people. But when you really dig down deep, they reminded us that this work doesn't start when a young person is 13 years old. It starts when they're 1, 2, 3. It starts with their families. It starts with their community. And ever since then, I've been fired up about how important it is for all of us to work collectively together. So when I came to the city a couple of years ago, I was able to bring this type of enthusiasm with me. And I was just so pleased and thankful at the team at the Department of Families, Children, Youth, and Recreation that was so receptive and responsive and really have taken up this charge. So first of all, this morning, I would like to thank all of our teams, especially our youth services team that really put together today, but all of our teams at the department for working so hard for our families in Hartford. So please join me giving them a hand. So today is about us taking the next step forward. So last year we spent a lot of time building awareness, and many of you, like me, really are all fired up and want to do something that we can really help to improve the lives of our families and our children and our young people here in Hartford. So in order to do that, the team and I really took some time to say, okay, how can we help to move this forward and do it in the right way? Because what I didn't want to do was create basically a checklist for us to go check mark, this done, this done. I wanted actually for us to do something with purpose, with intention, and that was going to really result in real impact. So today's work is about us going deeper into a couple of the key developmental milestones for young people ages 12 to 24. Now, some of you were with us just a couple of weeks ago on May 14th to also talk more about early childhood, and we did more deep dives there and some possible intervention work that we're going to be doing here in Hartford as a result of data. So today is going to be about a lot of data, because we know with good data you can make some really good decisions, so we're going to be doing that today. So One of the things I also want to remind you guys is just some quick logistics for our day here is that our event will be primarily in this room. The restrooms, though, you go out down the hall, you go ahead and take a left, and you go down straight, take another left, and you'll have the restrooms there. We'll have our snacks and beverages and meal here in this room as well. I'm going to ask you to double check your cell phones right now. I realize how important it is to keep them on, so I'm not going to tell you to turn them off. That's not realistic. But if you can make sure that they're low or on vibrate, that's greatly appreciated. The other thing that's going to happen today is we do need to flip our agenda slightly. So some of you may have heard that our featured speaker, Arnold Chandler from Forward Change Consulting, is in flight right now. His flight was delayed, and then they missed the connecting flight this morning, but he is somewhere in the air over the East Coast making his way up from Atlanta. So as a result of that, what we're going to do, we were planning on having our panel discussion first anyhow, so thank you, team, because apparently that was a brilliant idea now, right? Is we're going to go ahead and do our panel discussion, and we're going to plan to go into our small group discussion. He will be here midday to join us to do his presentation, and I think when you guys have a chance to hear from Arnold, you're going to be very impressed. So, again, I just am so excited about today. We'll talk more as the day continues. I'm looking forward to what comes out of our work here today, because it's not about just one day. It's basically how we're going to move this work together forward and push it forward. And with that, I want to introduce Mayor Bronin to give you a few welcoming remarks as well. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kim, and thanks to the entire team at the Department of Family, Children, Youth, and Recreation. We're lucky to have an outstanding team there that is focused on not just continuing and leading a conversation about how we can disrupt the cradle to prison pipeline, but also trying to really turn that discussion into action. And I just want to say thank you to them for everything they do, and thank you to everybody in this room who is a partner in that effort. You probably know, if you were here last year, we had one conference that was focused on the entire pipeline, all the way from Cradle to Opportunity Youth, 16 to 24-year-olds. And this year broke it up into those two conversations. And I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of the answer to this discussion is rooted in the discussion that happened last week, which is the early childhood. If we don't get that piece right, this piece is so much harder. That said, when young people get to that age of 12, 14, 15, 16 to 24, it presents unique challenges, different circumstances, and we've got to work in different ways. And so we've been focused as a city on trying to be a lot more creative at re-engaging those young people who've been disconnected, who we've failed or who have been failed somewhere along the way. Whether that was through the Youth Service Corps, which is now putting about 250 young people to work throughout the city, part-time, year-round, earning a paycheck, doing community projects, but also getting connected to mentors and partners at OPP. Whether it's through the Opportunity Youth Collaborative and the work to try to make sure that all of our great organizations are actually sharing information about the young people that they're working with. I mean, we're blessed in this city to have an incredible number of great youth service organizations. Whether it's this one right here, where we sit at the Artist Collective, whether it's the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, Compass Youth Collaborative, OPP, CRT, we can go on, the Ebony Horsewomen, PAL, but all too often, there's not a lot of coordination between those groups. And sometimes there's not even a lot of information shared. And we've seen that in some tragic ways, where young people have fallen through the cracks, even though they had connections, they had relationships with one or more of those organizations, but that information just wasn't shared. So one of the things that I don't know how much of a part of the discussion it'll be today, but I wanted to say anyway, with this incredible range of partners in this room, we'd ask you to join us in that effort, to share data, to share information, to break down your walls a little bit, to get beyond your comfort zone when it comes to talking with each other, not being so protective about who we're working with, but recognizing that we are all working together for every single one of the kids in our city. So that is a critical part of what we're doing, and I will say up front, we haven't moved as fast as we'd want to move. We've got a long way to go, but we are focusing persistently and in a sustained way through the Opportunity Youth Collaborative. I'm trying to break down those walls, and I invite you to be a part of that. I also want to, Kim, none of this was what I'm saying was planned, so I may be completely thrown off from what Kim wanted to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to the panel later. But I also just want to throw out an issue there that is challenging to us right now. If we want to be serious about second chances, we've got to be more serious about better chances in the first place, and that's what last week's discussion was about. That's got to be what a big part of this discussion is about. But I also think we have to talk honestly about this. We as a state have been a leader in criminal justice reform, and I'm so grateful that we are, because we have to move away from our over-reliance on incarceration and the reliance of the criminal justice system to get kids who are challenged, just out of the way off the streets. That's not the way to make our communities stronger and safer. As we've made those criminal justice reforms, I don't think as a state we've done nearly enough to create the alternatives. And we're seeing right now in this city the consequences of that. We're seeing an uptick in youth violence, and we're wrestling as a team with how to deal with that. We're wrestling as a team, Family, Children, Youth, and Recreation, together with our organizations that I mentioned before, together with our police department, together with partners at the state. We need to do so much better. And so I hope that a part of the discussion today and a part of what comes out of this is some real serious thinking and some difficult conversation about how we can do better at giving better chances in the first place. But when a young person has really fallen off track, when they might present a risk to themselves or others, what are we doing and how can we be doing better at it? Because right now, as good as all the work that's being done is, we're really struggling. And so we need everybody in this room to be a part of that. Having said all that, I just want to say thank you again to everybody who's here. It's hard to imagine a more important thing to be doing in this city. I don't think there's anything that could possibly make a bigger difference to the strength of our community than getting better at making sure that our young people have the support and the assistance and the mentorship and the guidance and are being engaged and re-engaged all the way through from 0 to 3 all the way up to the time when they're independent adults. So thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you for being part of this conversation. God bless you all.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Bronin, for being here and for those words, and thank you so much to Kim Oliver as well for her leadership over our department, and thank you to all of you for being here this morning. As Hartford's Youth Service Bureau, the City of Hartford Department of Families, Children, Youth, and Recreation is dedicated to supporting the youth-serving organizations in Hartford that provide essential services to Hartford's young people and to their families. The City of Hartford has made a commitment to focus more deeply on a population of unique youth, disconnected and disengaged youth. Disconnected youth are defined as having not received a high school diploma or the equivalent and are not enrolled in school despite being 21 or younger. Disengaged youth are defined as youth enrolled in high school but show signs of academic, behavioral, and/or attendance-related disengagement. The needs of both of these populations are addressed through our department's Youth Justice Initiative in combination with a youth employment strategy as a means to strengthen youth connectedness in the community. The Connecticut Opportunity Project states that 39,000 or more than 1 in 5 high school students are disengaged or disconnected in Connecticut. Now, the panel will talk more about issues and statistics related to Hartford, but that's 39,000 youth in the state of Connecticut that are disengaged or disconnected. According to this same study, if together we engage just half of those 39,000 youth, the state would achieve 2,000 additional graduates, 8,000 more jobs for 18 to 35-year-olds, 4,000 fewer people incarcerated, and $3 billion additional gross state product. When speaking with young people, they often express that disconnected and disengaged don't adequately describe them. They prefer rather the term opportunity youth. We believe opportunity youth is especially fitting because when given crucial support, resources, and skills from our community, their opportunities for growth are limitless. This is why the work that all of you do every day is so important, and why attending a conference such as this reinforces your commitment to our most valuable resource, which is our young people. We hope that you are engaged and inspired through today's conference and leave here with actionable steps that you can take back to your work to make a sustainable change in the lives of our young people. So with that being said, I would like to call up our panel to join us here on the stage and to turn this over to introduce Mr. Courtenay Jackson, who is the director of the North Hartford Promise Zone, who will be moderating our dynamic panel today. Thank you all so much and enjoy your day.
So again, I'm Courtenay Jackson. I'm the North Hartford Promise Zone and My Brother's Keeper director at the City of Hartford and a lifelong resident of Hartford. So I'm really excited about this conversation. And I think this really gives us an opportunity for us collectively to really figure out sustainable and systematic changes that we can implement together. Because our kids need it and they deserve it. So with that being said, I'm just going to go down the line and let everyone on the panel introduce themselves. And also, as we're going along, if you have questions, if you have comments, I think it's going to be exciting to implement those into the conversations, write those down, and we'll have that conversation towards the end. Go.
Rodney, Carr, Hartford Youth Service Program, OPP. Outspoken, such as Red. Work to take care of my family.
There you go.
Y'all hear me now? Y'all hear me now? Let's go
Hey.
now. I'm Rodney Carr, OPP, Hartford Youth Service Program, 24 years old, born in New Haven, Connecticut, came down here 7 years ago, try to turn around my life, take care of my family, just work, outspoken, all I know how to be is real. That's it.
Good morning, my name is Jen Peterson. I'm from the Department of Correction. I work at Cheshire Correctional and I am the unit manager of the True Unit, which is geared to 18 to 25-year-olds.
Hi, my name is Crystale McCoy. I'm from OPP Youth Service and I'm 19 years old. I graduated high school in 2017.
I'm Chris Doucot from the Hartford Catholic Worker. I have to say, I've lived in Hartford for 25 years, but I'm from Boston, and I haven't picked up your accent yet. At the Catholic Worker, although folks in the neighborhood call it the greenhouse because we painted it garishly green, we just have tried to create a safe place for people from the neighborhood and people from the suburbs to get together to build community and break down some of the barriers.
Good morning. My name is Mario Florez. I am the Director of School Climate and Culture for Hartford Public Schools. My department oversees restorative approaches and practices, positive behavior intervention and supports, or PBIs for short, attendance, that includes truancy, chronic absenteeism, Title VI investigations, which are harassment based on protected class, so race, ethnicity, etc., bullying, a little bit of everything, the annual climate survey. I do a lot of mediations around the city with some of the more hardcore big issues that we have with some of our youth. and I'm also the vice chair for the Commission on Women, Children, and Seniors. And so my youth, the work around youth in this city is deep and a passion that I have.
Thank you to all of our panelists. Let's give them a small round of applause. So I think it's important to just start off with giving some historical context of, how did we get here? We know in the beginning in the 1940s, a lot of migration to the north. The folks who came to Hartford, the minority folks that came to Hartford, they actually settled in the north end. Unemployment was high, there was school segregation, relationships with police was strained, but we were able to develop a commercial district that provided resources for individuals that lived here, and it was a place to work. After the riots, those businesses either permanently closed or relocated. And I'm going to start off by going with Chris. Could you give a little context into what led to the riots and some of the long-term effects of those riots?
Sure. It's a little bit, I think, misleading or dangerous to begin with the riots because it gives us maybe an impression that the riots just sprang out of nowhere. The riots, which Dr. King called the language of the unheard, were the end result of a process that began with the FHA helping to expedite the home ownership, frankly, for white Americans. Between 1934 and 1962, the FHA subsidized $120 billion worth of mortgages for people to be able to purchase a home, build equity, and enter the middle class. Of those mortgages, 98% of it went to white people. It was a very successful anti-poverty program for white people, and it expedited the white flight from the cities of our nation, Hartford not being alone in what took place. Along with the FHA, we had in the late 50s and in the 60s, we had urban renewal, which further isolated people of color and low-income people in our cities. We had downtown neighborhoods that were economically integrated, vertically integrated is the term that is used. Those neighborhoods were destroyed and turned into either tourist attractions like the Gateway Arch in St. Louis or commercial development like Constitution Plaza in Hartford. The white folks that lived in those neighborhoods moved to the suburbs. The people of color and the lower income people of those neighborhoods moved into housing projects in the neighborhoods. And then we had the highway program come in, and in a sense, the highways physically isolated neighborhoods from downtowns. They act as moats around our downtowns. In a sense, to make the downtowns feel a bit more like the suburbs. You remove people of color, you remove low-income people, and what you have left are white middle-class professionals that come in from the suburbs and populate the downtown during the day and then leave at sundown. What remains in the neighborhoods is a concentration of lower-income people who begin to despair of their opportunities. And when we have the assassinations of the late 60s, that only adds to the despair that boils over into the riots. The long-term impact of that on the neighborhood, well, one of the immediate things you notice when I moved to Clark Street back in '93, you couldn't help but notice all of the abandoned buildings and vacant lots, many of them which had been abandoned since the riots in '68. And that they remained abandoned for the next 40 years is remarkable. What's missing are small businesses that provide economic opportunities for people. And the despair when you become isolated like that, well, that affects your outlook on life. When you're a kid, think about it. You have dreams, right? You know what you want to be when you grow up. What happens when you don't have dreams? What happens when you don't have confidence that there's a future for you? How does that impact your decision making? How does that impact your outlook on life? We had a kid, Herbie. I asked him when he was maybe 12 or 13 what he wanted to be when he grew up, and I was relatively new to the city, only been there maybe 5 years at the time, and he didn't have an answer for me. He hadn't thought about growing up. And the tragedy is he was killed when he was 17. He didn't get an opportunity to grow up. So if we're going to look at the riots, we need to look at a bigger picture. We need to look at the ways in which the resources of our nation maybe could be spent a little bit more wisely, a little bit more compassionately. I'm thrilled to hear that our piece of the pie is a part of this project, right? The very name, our piece of the pie. We have a big enough pie in this society. We just need to slice it a little bit differently. We need more funding for our cities and maybe less funding for some of the wars that we're fighting. Connections Dr. King was making in the last year of his life, where he connected racism, militarism, and economic exploitation, and called them the triple evils. We could have more for our neighborhoods if we spent our money a little bit differently. We could have better public transportation to try to overcome some of the isolation of the people in our neighborhoods so they could get to jobs a bit more easily. So that if they're working a second shift job out at Buckland Hills Mall, they're able to make it home and the bus from downtown back to the neighborhood hasn't left for the night. Maybe there were more bus schedules and the buses ran a bit more frequently so that people didn't have to choose jobs based on when and where the buses ran. But that takes money, and we need to demand that money. That money needs to be invested in our neighborhoods. Our schools, you know, we need more teachers, and we need more teachers' aides. Why do we have to have, 20 or 25 students in a classroom? What would be wrong with having 10 students in a classroom, creating more jobs and working to strengthen our community? It takes money. That money doesn't come without the participation of the citizens. Ralph Nader, one of his lines is that the most important office for any American to seek and to hold and to execute is the office of the citizen. And it's the office we all overlook. We all hold in this room the most important office in the land, and we need to use that power to demand that the money that we pay in taxes is invested in our neighborhoods, in our children, and in their future.
Thank you, Chris. So I want to move along to Jen. Could you talk to us about the True Unit and also what lessons can your experience teach those of us that work with Hartford's young people every day?
Sure. Just to give you a little background of what the True Unit is, the Governor Malloy and the Commissioner of DOC, Commissioner Semple, went to Germany in 2015. It was sponsored by the Vera Institute of Justice. And this is where the idea came as far as isolating the 18 to 25-year-olds because they are very impulsive during that the time age frame. So they came back and a committee was formed to designate a facility that would hold these 18 to 25-year-olds. At first it was talked about taking over a facility, a whole facility, but at the time we couldn't. Right now we are at Cheshire Correctional and we took over a unit and currently we have 46 mentees and 10 mentors. Prior to the unit opening, there's a lifers group that was formed and individuals that come together once a week trying to, make communities better. They're working with Hartford PD as far as, how to curb the violence, kind of getting some ideas from them. So these mentors live on the unit. They come in, there's two to a group, so the groups come in 12 to 14 inmates, the mentees, they're between the 18 to 25-year-old range, and it's good that these guys come in with such small numbers because they're able to gain the perspective of others, get to know each other on a more depth level. The True Unit provides programming for these individuals, and it prepares the individuals for the obstacles that they will encounter down the road. So within that first 6 months of the program, they're taking every single program that is offered by the Department of Correction, and it's geared to them for them to educate themselves, and maybe they didn't get an experience as what we offer through these programs. So just to give you perspective, when an individual is sentenced, they are giving this offender accountability plan. and they have to take programs that are geared to what their crime is and their history of, their history of violence. A lot of the general population inmates, they stay on these wait lists and unfortunately take a long time to get into these programs. So with the True Unit, these guys are able to get in and take these programs even if it isn't geared to their crime, so that they educate themselves on what's going on, because they might not be educated and may not have been experienced any of the stuff that they're learning through these programs. After that, we have programs that are facilitated by mentors. One particular program is called the Reflections Program, and a mentor created this. This is that gray that we're working with. We don't ever have inmates that facilitate programs, and now in the True Unit, they're coming up with programs that are going to gear to these young kids and engage them so that they understand what they're getting out of the program. So this program holds up a mirror to a man to examine himself on who he is today, who he has been in the past, and who he wants to become in the future. This program is not only to the betterment of himself, but also for those around him in the communities they come from. It helps them understand how his views of someone were formed over time from a myriad of influence to include the environment that he comes from, those closest to him in society as a whole. This program also discusses personal values, constructive self-disclosure, perception, the naive perspective versus social intelligence, how to accept one's past in order to change one's future, building a positive self-concept, power of expectations, and understanding that people, places, and things may be required to change before situations, circumstances, and consequences force one to do so. We prepare them by also programming them on life skills. We teach them resume building, how to manage, sell themselves due to the restrictions that they have. We provide tools and the community resources that people may not be aware of. We allow them to be human and understand the ebb and flow of their emotions and how to appropriately manage those experiences. Negative behaviors are conversations and appropriate consequences are given. They're not cookie cutter and one size fit all. Youth are more likely to see our consequences as fair, which is an integral part of learning from their mistake. We model right living in the community, we denormalize deviant behavior, and we are active role players with their family. So just to give you also a perspective as far as how much staff are involved in this unit, myself, there's one unit manager to 56 of these inmates. Now, I came from a general population unit manager, and I had 300 inmates that I managed. So it's more of a real life, one-on-one basis, getting to know who they are, where they come from, and their perspective. We have 7 officers that are on first shift that sit at a table and play cards, build a rapport with these guys, and they understand where they come from. We have a coach, intramural basketball game that an officer coaches. He also has, he was a college basketball player who he still has contacts in the field, and he's getting contact from one of the guys to play basketball again. He had a full ride to Nebraska, and he came back to his city of Bridgeport and got involved. The kids made fun of him because of the way he talked, how he changed, how he was different. And he lost that scholarship, and now he's working to getting back into college and playing basketball again. So it's stuff that we work in the gray that is not normal for the Department of Correction, but we're moving in that direction and trying to bridge the gap.
Excellent, excellent. It's great to see, relationship building is key in all walks of life, especially this. One of today's topics is school connectedness. So I want to swing this over to Mario and ask the question of how do you identify disconnected youth in Hartford schools who are at risk of dropping out, and what is the school system doing to keep those kids engaged and strengthen school connectedness?
Kristina gave you the definition of what a disengaged or disconnected student was, right? And so we're not going to get too much into that, but I wanted to present the data to you because I was asked the question about dropout rates. And our dropout rate went from, and this is as the state defines, dropped out as, they define it as other, right? Kids that didn't graduate within their cohort, that moved on to post-secondary, stopped coming to school, typical kind of traditional dropout, are unknown, so we don't know where they are, or transferred out and we just have no idea if they went to another school or not. Our dropout rate was 27% in 2010. So at the end of 2010, we were at 27%. At the end of last year, we were at 13.4%, right? So we decreased that by about 50%. It's a little misleading though because our graduation rate hasn't really paralleled that decrease in dropout. But it does mean that we're holding on to kids more often, right? So where you might see kids not graduating in 4 years or graduating in 5 or 6, but at least we're still holding on to them, and we're trying to do our best to make sure that we're not practicing exclusionary practices through punitive disciplinary practices that we always did. I mean, when I went to school, if you got into a fight, it was automatically 10 days out. You got caught with a knife, it was an automatic 180-day expulsion. And so we're moving away from those things in order to really look at kids specifically on a case-by-case scenario, restoratively, to make sure that we're not putting them out and contributing to that dropout, because it's very hard to re-engage a child once you yourself are the ones that are pushing them out. Right? So the way we look at the data, and we can talk about early indicators until we turn blue. Right? There was a program out of Stanford that looked at early warning signs, and it starts way before they even get to the school system. So I'm glad that the conversation went from the school to prison pipeline to the cradle to prison pipeline. If we get a kid at 5 years old in kindergarten, at that point, if they haven't been socialized appropriately, if they haven't been even exposed to a book, right, those things become very difficult for us to try to ingrain, especially with a classroom teacher with 23 kids, where you might have 7 that may already be labeled, 7 that are ELL, another couple that require other services, and so it's very difficult for us to get them at 5 years old and then still make up for what we're dealing with outside in terms of environmental factors. And I see a colleague of mine, we have the conversation often about cultural competency, and that's another approach that we're using around how to re-engage and keep our kids connected. And we say cultural competency, but we have a hard time defining what that is. What does that mean? And so we're moving into cultural humility, which is, I don't know about your culture, teach me about it. Right, how many of you guys are classroom teachers? Raise your hand. Okay, so we have about 3, right, out of an audience of a lot. I'm not even gonna wonder how many of you guys are out there, but that's our first line of defense, right? We can talk. I see a lot of stakeholders here that we engage. We're in the same meetings all the time. It's the same faces all the time, but we're not getting down to the first line of defense, which are our classroom teachers. And so we're trying to also train our administrators to train their staff, but it's also very difficult because we have competing interests. And so it's important to understand why the school system has now prioritized climate and culture as an approach to also connect with our students. One anecdote that I've been using as of late is I mean, if you don't really know Hartford, it's a tale of 2 cities, right? Last week we had Tom Dillon from Literacy Lab here, and what I did, we went to dinner with him, and I said, let me give you a ride home. So I was giving him a ride home. I said, do you mind if I take you on a scenic route? He said, no, let's go. So we went up Park Street, went through the West End, and I took him down Scarborough Street, and he was like, wow, this is beautiful, right? And I said, check it out. And I took a ride on Albany Avenue. And he said, those are the projects, right? I said, yeah, those are the projects. He said, but we were just around mansions. And I said, yes, that's Hartford in a nutshell, right? Where a kid can literally be in the projects and look at a mansion and realize, I will probably never, ever live there. And so it's demoralizing. And it's very difficult to make those genuine connections. We are all in the work. I see CBOs, I see FBOs, I see all kind of organizations out here. I see municipal workers, I see juvenile justice. We're all here together. One story that I've been using is we can take everybody in this room. We can start at Scarborough Street, walk down the Ave, which we call Albany Avenue, right? Walk down the Ave, and some people won't go past Blue Hills. We'll keep walking, and some people will stop at Vine Street, because I'm going to take a left on Vine, right? Some people say, well, I'm not going down Vine, and I'm not trying to disrespect our neighborhoods, but the mayor said it earlier, we have to have some courageous conversations about what's going on in our neighborhoods, right? Then I'm going to take a right on Mather, and that group is going to get even smaller, and we're all in the work. Imagine doing this at 9, 10 o'clock at night. How many of us are still willing to walk down those streets, right? So when we try to make what we call genuine connections with kids, it's very difficult because myself, I got expelled. I got expelled from East Hartford High. I caught my first case at 17. I caught my second at 22, right, with a college degree. And it's something that we talked about in our racial and ethnic disparities work here in the city is when we look at school-based arrests and community-based arrests of our students, interfering with a police officer was a charge that we kept seeing pop up. And I wear my heart on my sleeve. Those of you that work with me know that, I'm pretty transparent about my background and my past. And they said, what's with this interfering with a police officer? And it became this thing where if you just talk back to a cop, I can just be arrested. And I said, look, that happened to me at 22 years old, out of my own home with a college degree. And so it isn't just necessarily our children, but but they are the ones that are even more targeted than some guy in a suit with a college degree. And so it really becomes important to make sure that we build genuine connections, and it's not necessarily about color, right? Because 92% of our teachers are white women, right? And so it's important to understand those factors, but it's also important to understand that love and respect for our kids and a genuine kind of just listening. And it took me, I got married a little late, right? I got married at 37 years old. And my wife was the first one that taught me to just shut up, just listen. Sometimes I don't need an answer because my job by nature and by profession, I'm a problem solver. And so when I would hear something, I'm trying to give answers and solutions. And I realized there's no way I could understand what she's going through, right? Biological, I can't even imagine what she's going through, but I'm trying to offer kind of solutions. And that's what happens with our kids, is we have folks that, for the most part, don't look like them, can't identify with their struggles, because I get in my car and drive to my nice suburban home. And so I can say in the past I might be able to identify with it, and we can make some kind of genuine connection, but it's very difficult for them to do that. And so we need to start building our policies and our work around how can we get people like Manny at Peacebuilders, like Natalie, like Callie, like Jackie, Julia, like the folks, Miss Kelly, right? Like folks that can make the connections where I can say, listen, I have no idea what this kid's going through, and I'm not even gonna pretend, but I care enough to say, I can't do it. How can I connect you with somebody that can? And that's why it's important for us to work together, and it's not gonna be solely on the school system to do on its own.
Definitely. And you touched on the point I was just about to ask you, and I was going to say, what is the school system like? Like, what supports would be helpful? When we look across the room and we ask ourselves, as one community, how do we make this happen? Are there any specific things that you can point to and say, this is what we need right now?
Yes, right now, if some of you might be familiar with the strategic operating plan for the superintendent. We have a new administration. We're going through some transition. But the goal is to have every school be a community school by 2022. And basically, we'll have community partners that are embedded in the school that will help kids. We operate in a multi-tiered system of support, with Tier 1 being universal supports, Tier 2 being targeted group, and then Tier 3 being really formal, intensive, individualized supports for kids. And we need to rely on our community-based organizations to help us, because we don't have the expertise at the school level. Some of us, have been involved in that kind of work, the clinical aspect of it, psychosocial stuff, but for the most part, we don't have that expertise. So I think the community schools model will be something that will be helpful. But more importantly, and the mayor mentioned it earlier, regarding how do we break down the barriers around those tough conversations. Data sharing. How many of you guys that work in the CBO have had a hard time dealing with schools with regard to data sharing? And so that's a barrier that we need to start tackling. And we look around the room, and there's a lot of powerful people here, and our voice has to be heard with regard to legislative priorities around changing some of the laws that create barriers when we're trying to do the work with schools. Restorative approaches and practices. We have character education frameworks. We had examples like capturing kids' hearts. One real life example that just happened a couple weeks ago was, we're merging 3 schools into the Weaver campus, and one thing that happened with our schools when we moved into a portfolio model was making a lot of little schools. And I grew up in East Hartford. I'm an East Hartford Hornet. And I remember, when I got to college and kids were like, where are you from? I'm from the pub. I'm from Buckley. I'm from Weaver. And there was such pride in that. And that's where that connectedness and sense of community also has to come back. And we're recreating Weaver into 3 schools. And one thing that we did was understanding that we do have some violent things going on in the city with our youth. We took a group of more needy children in Journalism and Media Academy, High School Inc., and we partnered with DCF Wilderness School. And we took 8 and 8 kids, and they took them canoeing. I got pictures. It was a beautiful thing to see our kids that they've never been exposed to anything like that, and to see them on a hike. And the purpose of that was intentional in building that community with those 2 groups of students, because when we look at the climate and culture of the school next year, when they go into the JMA building, those are the groups of students that will be territorial, that will clash and bump heads. And so we wanted to make sure that we're intentional around building community with those kids. And so we definitely need to rely more on our partners to make sure that they help us with the work. And that's one example that I can give you with regard to DCF. I mean, we have a partnership, an MOU with Compass, and we rely on them heavily on their Peacebuilders when issues arise. And those are the strategies that we're using as a system.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm gonna move on to Crystale. Was there someone at your school, or maybe a particular teacher or coach with whom you felt particularly connected, and how did that relationship influence your experience in school, like your attendance or your participation at school? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Mostly every teacher in school loved me. Like, they didn't have no reason not to like me. So every time I came, they'd be like, Crystale, I hope you did this. You made sure you did this. I'd be like, yeah, I did. They'd be like, because you know I need you to graduate. I need you out of here. I seen you for 4 years too long. And I'll be like, all right. So every teacher, like, they all seen something to me. They all wanted me to graduate. Like, that was their goal for me to graduate because I've been here for so long. So they were just like, our goal is to get you out of here. And I've been through so much in Buckley. That's why they needed me to graduate and do what I had to do. So they was always on me, made sure I did everything, made sure I was at everything. Even if I didn't have enough for it, they'd still make a way for me to do what I need to do. And like classes I didn't even think I'd go to, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to that class because such and such in there, or they doing this in there, or like just something I like doing. And I'm the type of person, I don't even really like class. Yeah. Like, I'll walk past my class any day, but I'll be like, oh yeah, this teacher in there, I'm cool with her, so I'll go sit in there, or I'm cool with him, I'll go sit in there. But most teachers, like a new teacher, probably not like me because like I'm loud, and like you would have to know me to like me. But then after a while, like they'll get to know me, they'll start liking me, they'll want to push me like all the other teachers and the security guards, yeah. And they not even teachers.
So it was the whole community in the school that helped push you through?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So I want to come over to Rodney real quick. Employment is meaningful, and a living wage is meaningful as well. I want to see what barriers have you had in getting a job that pays well and that you actually like?
Well, I'm a convicted felon. Most of the job interviews I went to before I even applied for OPP they just judgmental. Like most of the job interviews that I went to, they was like judgmental. Once they see the robbery first, they like, they automatically assume I'm a thief or I'm a violent person because they see this on a piece of paper. I'd rather them just judge me for me. When I go in there, I be me. I'm not changing up to be this different person that I'm gonna show you this and be this whole different person once I get the job. Like, never done that. I've always been me. Like, another barrier would be like, right now, I got a family situation right now I'm dealing with. My mother, she's sick. Like, I can only work a certain amount of days and time and hours until I gotta go back, or she gotta go back to the cancer center. I gotta go help her again. So I go back to New Haven, do that. And then just my high school diploma, which I'm on my way to. Thanks to OPP, they helped me online. This Penn Foster thing. Those really the only barriers, really. But it's not really even stopping me. It just slowed me down. Because I'm still chasing my goals. I'm still one at a time, just busting them down. That's it.
Definitely. Appreciate that. And Jen.
Courtney, can I add to that for 1 second, please? Go ahead. So Mario mentioned the interfering with the police charge. One of the things that happens to the young people in our cities is that they are policed much more closely than our young people in the suburbs. It's not that our young people are more prone to criminal activity. They're more likely to be caught or charged with something that's bogus, like speaking up for yourself. According to the CDC, drug use in the suburbs is actually slightly higher than it is in the city. But you can use your drugs in the city in the comfort of your home or your friend's home if your parents aren't there, or on your back deck, and you can be pretty confident that you're not going to be stopped and frisked all of a sudden by the police. That's not the case in the neighborhood. You are stopped and frisked on a regular basis, particularly if you're a young man in our neighborhood. It's not that the kids have any more pot on them than the kids in the suburbs do. There was a building, I believe it was on Capon Street, where the landlord had spray painted with a stencil on the front door of the building, no loitering, no trespassing, police take notice, tenants included. And so the police had carte blanche to be harassing young people on their own front porch or in their own yard. And they're getting arrested for loitering and trespassing, for interfering with the police, for saying, what are you doing? And maybe there's a drug charge. And they're going to court. They're going to be represented by a public defender who's overwhelmed and doesn't know their case. 95% of all criminal cases in the United States end in plea deals. What that means is 95% of all these cases are ending in guilty pleas. If you're in the city, you also end up with a drug-free school zone charge because it's impossible to be in the city and not have that charge. Now, say you're a white kid in the suburbs and you had the misfortune of being stopped and frisked and they found some pot on you. Most likely, you're not in a drug-free school zone because there's fewer of them in the suburbs, and you're not having the loitering or trespassing charge, and there's a better chance that your parents have the money to hire you a private attorney, and you're not going to be getting a guilty verdict on your record. University of Chicago a few years back did a study. They sent out actors, white men and black men, with identical resumes to places that were looking for help. And white men were offered jobs or second interviews at a higher rate than black men. We have a built-in racial disadvantage, a racist disadvantage, the original sin of our society. They added criminal records to their resumes. White men with criminal records were offered jobs at a higher rate than identically qualified black men without criminal records. These sorts of things need to be taken into consideration. Part of that, and it relates to the riots and the isolation of people in our neighborhoods, is there's this stigma of our neighborhoods. I hear it from my students when I teach at Central who are from the neighborhood, and they call it a bad neighborhood. Well, that implies that the people in the neighborhood are bad. And we need to break down that stigma, and that has to come through fostering, facilitating relationships where we can cross some of these barriers in our society, urban, suburban, generational, racial, class barriers, where people can get to know other people and dispel some of these myths. So maybe the identically qualified black guy gets offered the job over the identically qualified white guy with a record.
I feel like this, like, it's all a business for them. It's money for them. That's it, really. That's all it really boiled down to. They want that money. Because every time I caught a case that was petty or a case that I wasn't really the perpetrator, but I'm on the scene and this person accused me of this or whatever the case may be. Like, they want money, and they throw the case out. You know, like he said, like how they segregate people based on their income. Like the lower income housing areas, they get patrolled more than the suburbs, more frequently. Like, you caging everybody that's broke in this one area of the town, and you think that it's just gonna be peaches and cream? That's what I'm not understanding, you know what I mean?
Understand, definitely.
It's hard to understand it.
Definitely. Yeah,
Or like,
we don't mind.
One of the oldest people in the room. So let me correct something. It was stated that people who migrated from the South came to Connecticut, Hartford, and went to the North End. That is not true. That is not true. The North End was redlined. People who migrated from the South came to an area which was called the Bottom. I know, I lived there. The Bottom was where CRT is now. All black neighborhoods were near railroad tracks. Why? Because if there was ever a civil uprising, they could get federal troops in. So all black neighborhoods in America were near the railroad tracks. That was true for Hartford. Weston Street a good portion of it was owned by a black woman. They took that land from her, took out the bottom, made everybody move, saying that they were going to build better housing to bring people back. Well, you know what Weston Street is now. Black people at that time began to move up to Main Street. You could not cross Main Street. I'm talking Hartford. Black people lived along the border. There was 2 families that lived on Mail Avenue, blacks. My family bought a house from a Holocaust survivor named Betsy Kaplan, who owned a lot of property in the North End. The North End was redlined, so they couldn't get a mortgage in the North End. My family bought this property and Miss Kaplan mortgaged it for them because we weren't allowed to be there. When we moved there, it was an uprising like you would not believe, that Miss Kaplan allowed this property to go to black people. Once all of that land on Weston Street was taken, black people began to move across Main Street, up into the North End. The North End was predominantly Jewish and Italian. When black people began to move forward across Main Street, they began to move out. The riots happened when Martin was killed. When Martin was killed, first of all, my first job was on Barber Street. Barber Street was a mecca of small businesses, pharmacies, restaurants, 5 and dimes, dress shops, bakeries. All of that was in the North End. It was all Jewish owned. Nidus Brothers floor covering, that's my first job. When that demographic moved out and blacks moved in, there was another turning that was happening in Connecticut. Connecticut became a welfare state. You could get welfare in Connecticut at the drop of a dime. Caribbeans came in, poor blacks came in, upward mobile blacks moved out, Jews, Italians moved out, and Hartford became a poor city, okay? When that happened, when I graduated from Weaver High School, went to the Marine Corps, I left Hartford. When I came home from the Marine Corps, there was a sign on the highway that said North Hartford. I went right past that exit. I'm like, where the heck is North Hartford? Well, that was when the city of Hartford began to punish the North End for the riots and the loss of business. I mean, they shut it down. City services, any kind of services, fire, police, they shut it down. The marketing that went on about the North End was tremendous, the negative marketing. That sign on the highway was to tell people this is where the boogeyman lives. I'm telling you. Also, something that you need to understand or begin to think about, the Civil Rights Act. Prior to the Civil Rights Act, 84% of black families had fathers. Post-civil rights, it's 13%. What happened? Hartford is the way it is now because of the punishment that the city government brought down on the North End. And Connecticut becoming a welfare state. So if we're gonna look at cradle to prison, you have to understand that prison is a self-driving business and the schools are sending the prisons the names. Also, what you should know that you don't know, in the late 60s to 70s, this is very important. Social Security numbers. Your middle 2 numbers, if you're African American, they are even numbers. If you're any other demographic, they're odd numbers. Your middle Social Security, that is the way they begin to understand where you are and how many prisons to build. So let's start with the basics and try to find out what's happening. And it had to be with the history of what happened in Hartford.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. And I think there's be time to continue that conversation. I want to thank you for providing that information. So one question I want to pose to the panel. Justice involvement is a multi-generational, and many of our young people have parents that are incarcerated for part of their childhood. Incarceration can impact the parents' relationship with their children and extended family, as well as with their child's school and service providers. What effects of parental justice involvement do you see on the social and emotional development of our youth? And I want to just open that up to everyone on the panel.
I could go first.
You can go first. Yeah.
I feel like it's like that's somewhat of a fact, because I was incarcerated when my daughter was born. I did 2.5 years. She's 4 years old. So I was going for a good percentage of her life, but she still know who I was. We still had a bond, connection. She sent pictures home. She kissing them. She know who I am. Everything. It's just the part that hurt the most is just like not being there to teach her the little stuff, like her to walk and crawl and all that good stuff. I didn't have the time to really, but we still got that connection. So it's like 50-50 with that. I feel like it depends on how much you apply yourself to be in that child life. Because I was phone calls every day talking to her on the phone, even though she can't talk back. And that's why we got the connection we got. Write her letters every week, write her 2 letters every week, calling her twice a week, and just making sure she's hearing my voice, keeping that image in her head.
Definitely.
When I finally met her, it was like, who this guy? I remember your voice, but like, you look like me, but you ain't been around. Yeah. She gave me a little distance, but after a while, it was like, yeah, this him. This him. He was talking to me in the womb. You know what I mean?
I think, Ms. Kelly, thank you so much for the history lesson. I think it's important for us to know the conditions that were created in order to put us where we are now. And I have a little following on social media. Those of you that are friends with me on Facebook know that it could be a political hotbed sometimes, but I think it's important for us to have these kind of conversations. And when the Kanye West controversy came out regarding the choice, and it wasn't even worded like that, but the choice of slavery, right? It became this thing where, for me, when we look at what we're talking about with regard to Black upward mobility moving out, and so role models kind of went away, the incentivization of single-family households through social incentives. It's very difficult to have those conversations nowadays, and I think the older we get, the kind of more conservative we become with those kinds of things. And they compared, people were getting upset because they were comparing Kanye West to Malcolm, right? And when we talk about Malcolm and Martin and some of and that's, the autobiography of Malcolm X was very influential for me when I was growing up. And that rhetoric probably wouldn't be welcome right now, right? When you think about what Malcolm was teaching with regard to general civilization classes and Muslim girls training. Those are actual things that he was teaching about. And so I don't know where we're going to be able to strike the balance between the trauma-informed care that we talk about and building resiliency, because the strategies around trauma-informed practices and understanding that our kids are coming from environments that they're coming to us baseline traumatized, right? And our speaker this afternoon, when he gets here, he's a good guy. I'm looking forward to hearing him speak. We talk about ACEs often, right? And the adverse childhood experiences and your ACE score, and that's where the trauma-informed care comes in. And he told me, he said, Mar, you know that watching somebody get shot isn't an ACE? I said, what do you mean? It has to be, right? And so I looked it up, and it isn't. And so the things that our kids are coming in with, and my colleague Sonia Denal has told me often, she said, Mario, we need to look at the conditions that created the trauma, because if we're trying to address just the trauma, we're never going to get to the root cause. And that's why I think it was important for us to hear the history lesson about Hartford. I had a friend that did 5 years, from 18 to 23 years old, and he was lucky enough to be resilient enough to come out and become successful. And when I think about our young kids that get locked up, come out with a felony, even if their intentions are in the right place, they are being denied opportunities, being denied jobs, being denied the right to vote. And it's demoralizing, and it disenfranchises you. And I think about growing up when my friends got locked up and they came out, and I said, all right, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm going to try to apply for this job, but if that doesn't happen, the phrase was, I'm going to hit the block, right? I'm going to hit the block, because things that are economically viable for our kids are accessible all the time, right on the street corner. You mentioned the drug use in the suburbs, and I was asked to testify on behalf of the Commission on Women, Children, and Seniors on an opioid epidemic forum, and somebody told me, hey, you know what, you need to represent for the kids of color, right? Because the rhetoric was these thugs, right? And our babies. And I had to tell them, look, the average heroin user is 18 to 23 years old, white, male, right? So they're not necessarily babies. And the thugs that you're talking about are 14 and 15 years old. And so those are the actual babies. And it was very difficult to have that conversation with people that have been victimized by the opioid epidemic here in Connecticut and throughout the nation. But those are the kinds of conversations that we need to have in order to really understand how we're criminalizing our kids who are babies. Think about, white teen found, right, 19 years old. As soon as a kid turns 18, black male. Right? And so even our, and we all know bias in the media, et cetera, but we need to really think about the language that we're using, the code words that we're using, and really get to the root cause of why our kids are coming in traumatized. It's not necessarily, it is their neighborhoods, but what caused that, and how can we really help them dig into those roots?
Thanks, Mario. Was the time queued for the entire, or we have time for Q&A now? Excellent. Okay, so I want to open up the floor for Q&A. Do we have another mic? Okay, so if anyone has any questions, you can just.
I'm going to start back here.
How you doing? Manny Sandoval, Compass Peacebuilders. I'd like to know if we're really speaking about disrupting the cradle to prison pipeline. How can the Board of Education continue to lose essential teaching and coaching mentorship positions in efforts to continue to bring down the deficit that's right now happening, while hiring top, heavy, non-impactful positions, such as security that I'm hearing about, instead of meaningful. I mean, we're losing people that are actually on the ground level, that are helping kids get to college, helping them with filling out all that paperwork, and just just making that meaningful impact. And that's kind of like, as someone who's actually there every day, working with the young people, seeing tears that came out their eyes the other day when they heard about it, it just bothered me, and I want to know if is there other solutions that we can think about.
Manny, you said Board of Ed, so I'm assuming. I got Kim over there in case. I love you too, Manny. I can't speak too much on what happens the levels above me. I can only speak to my work and what's going on with at least what I attribute partly to what's going on, right? We've had flat funding for I think 8 or 9 years now. We all know we're in a state of crisis with regard to our budget. We've had to cut over 200 staff each year the last couple of years. And when you think about the cutting of staff, we cut, for the most part, what we call our non-essential staff, right? So my behavioral technicians, I have about 40 in the district. They're considered non-essential because they are not certified. They are support staff. I believe that with the prioritization of climate and culture, with that stuff being embedded, it's going to have to make us really reflect on what's going on with our personnel practices and how we can better support our families. And one of the questions I was going to be asked today was the transition planning with the school closures. And I believe that the personnel really focusing on how we can better serve our children. I'll give you an example. Somebody's telling me, and this is when I've been in education 8 years, and 2 years in, I got into the central office and they told me, you know what these kids really need, Mario? They need instructional rigor. And I said, no, they need breakfast, right? And so, for me, when are we going to have the conversations? And this is a question that, you know, is a couple levels above me, but I at least wanted to give you the perspective of, yes, we do need to be more reflective. We need to think about organizationally, look at an org chart and say, where is it that our kids have the most need? If it is in fact mentorship, then why aren't we putting more dollars towards mentorship programs? The MOU that we have with Compass, with Peacebuilders, very effective where we have it. Why isn't it more widespread? Why aren't we taking some of those dollars and giving it back to the CBOs that are really, really doing the work on the ground and in the streets? And so I would love to answer your question more, you know, kind of directly and black and white, but it's not that simple. And so I'm hoping that conversations like this will really influence our board members, our politicians, and our community members that really, as constituents, we have to be the ones that say, no, you need to make this a legislative priority. We need to make sure that the city is hearing what our kids need, and it takes the voices of people like Mr. Sandoval and Ms. Kelly to really help us do that.
Next question. This is also an education question. I'm over here. So sorry, Mario, getting hit with all of them. My name is Jessie Livornia. I am curious to know what Hartford Public Schools are doing in particular insofar as, to be blunt, anti-racist training for teachers, because you spoke about the conditions that lead to trauma, and sometimes the practices that are happening in the classrooms themselves are trauma-inducing, and that is coming from a white middle-class woman who is taking a good hard look at my own implicit biases, which are fueled by the media, which somebody referenced as well. So I know that New York City public schools are doing training specifically, and they're calling it culturally responsive education training. What is Hartford doing to kind of get on that bandwagon?
Thank you for asking that question. That is a great question, and I'm glad that the limit for Hartford Public Schools questions was 2. So thank you for asking the last question for me. We started a few years ago. We were looking at the Glenn Singleton work around courageous conversations, the moral compass, and really having implicit bias training. We started off very strong, teaching our administrators and then doing some follow-up work with the schools. Last year we partnered with the Discovery Center that was providing professional learning for our administrators on implicit bias, racially relevant pedagogy, because it can't just be about cultural competence, especially when we can't define what cultural competence is. The fact that we have 3 classroom teachers here, where are my classroom teachers at? Raise your hand again. There's like 4 or 5 of you guys. Yeah, I know they are, and that's my point though, right? Why aren't they here? And so maybe we need to think about whether we need to help the schools find coverage where this is a place where they may come and develop some of that professional learning. But we're missing the mark, and we're pretty transparent about needing to do the work. We're still partnering with the Discovery Center, and they're helping us as a very critical friend and partner. And the reason I asked the teachers to raise their hands was we are giving the administrators a lot, but it's very difficult for it to trickle down. And I don't mean down in terms of, you know, levels of expertise or hierarchy, but if we are training our principals and they are to turnkey that learning to their staff in a staff meeting or during a professional development session, are they trained basically with just the training that we're giving them? Because if you look at just school turnaround as a whole, it's a 3 to 5 year process at the very least with very consistent systems and leadership. But we're expecting our principals to turnkey that information in a matter of weeks. And so we're asking them to say, recognize your bias, recognize institutional racism. We need you to learn about that. But now we're going to consider you the expert and go teach our teachers. And so we need to do more around our school-based staff, not just our leaders. And I think that's where the superintendent is moving now with the climate and culture as being a priority.
Can I just ask, does the residency requirement extend to teachers?
No.
That's something to think about.
Good morning, Callie Moquette. Mario, no, there is not a 2-question limit. You and I know each other, so I'm coming back at you. But I have 2 questions. One is for you, and the other one will be for Jennifer. But you mentioned that there are several things that you can't control because they are the positions above you. I want to ask, can you ask the question? Because I feel as though I worked in the school system for 2 years, so I learned a lot about the obstacles and barriers to doing school climate as well. Because a lot of our kids are truant, but it's because they don't feel safe going to school. They don't feel safe going to school either because of the teachers that are further extending the trauma, the fact that some of them are being bullied. I know that staffing has been ridiculous for Hartford Public Schools, and some of this is above your pay grade, but you are in a fortunate position where you have the ears of the people at the top. So I'm gonna ask you if you are willing to ask and then come back, because I think in terms of data sharing and question asking, we really need to know who's asking and whether the answers are actually being provided. So I just want to hold you accountable for that aspect. And my question for Jennifer is, how is the DOC and how are you guys going to work with the new transition that's happening? So the shutting down of CJTS, so a lot of the juvenile probation officers are being relocated and they're going to be, some of them are going to be moving. So what are the actual transition plans to service appropriately the juveniles who are getting the interfering charges, the breach of peace, who are just responding with violence because they're not fully learning, not in the school system at least, how to develop separate life skills. It's the community-based organizations that are doing it, but we're also strapped. So I'm just asking, what is the transition plan and how are you guys going to help with the disrupting the cradle to the prison pipeline?
Okay, so sorry, this is Kim. I'm going to let Mario off the hook for one. Jen, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Respond? Okay.
Sure. I really can't speak on CJTS because we're a separate entity. So as far as what we're doing within the True Unit, actually we're working with Dean Jones. Hi, Dean. Dean is working with the mentors. He has been coming in since February and creating a plan to meet with individuals that are coming up to their community release dates. So just to, again, put it into perspective, we have a reentry counselor that works with general population inmates who are coming up to their community release dates, and all that entails is just giving information to them and in hopes that they'll take that information and use it on the outside. With Dean, he's getting to know these guys. He's getting to know, because it's a few months before the community release dates, he's getting to know them so that he knows what sort of resources they may need. And not just, giving that to them in hopes that they use it on the way out, but being there when they are out there and providing transportation, job seeking, job training, in hopes that they can, form a sponsorship to possibly do a residency relocation. So that's what we're working on right now. And fortunately, we've only been open since January of 2017, so we are building the plane as we fly it. But I can't thank him enough for, taking the time, and for all of you guys, because I know that there are some individuals that come in with him and are willing to work with them. But with the mentors too, they came from where these guys are coming from. So they are more relatable than us that are working inside as far as, the needs that they need. So having the resources that we're working with on the outside and making sure that they utilize them when they go home is hopefully going to bridge the gap.
Okay, well, I can respond to the other part of your question if you want. So for those of you who don't know or didn't remember, I am a Board of Ed member for Hartford Public Schools. So when you say levels up, right, at one point it goes to superintendent and it goes to board members. So this is why I'm holding this event today, okay, because I believe this is important. But I think your bigger point is accountability, right? So the superintendent, and we've asked as a collective board for the superintendent to be accountable to it, and it's one of the reasons you put in her strategic plan the priority on climate and culture. And one of the things that we've asked for her to do is to further explain exactly how that looks like, okay? The other piece that's really important to this room is in this work, when I look at supporting our children, it's about family, it's about also our community, right? In addition to our teachers in the classroom. So similarly, we've asked, okay, superintendent, every school is gonna be a community school, and we're gonna partner with our community in a more robust and more effective and more impactful way. So how does that look? And she has been preparing those plans for us, and she shared some information. Admittedly, we need to share more information. I have no problem being born and raised in Hartford, going to Hartford Public Schools, board chair, went to Hartford Public Schools, superintendent, Hartford Public Schools. We have no problem being held accountable by our neighbors and our family and our friends. So what I will do, because I heard loud and clear from today that we want to continue this part of the conversation and accountability, I'm going to bring that back to my board because I'm empowered to do so. And I'm going to ask specifically what we're going to do in terms of having more than just a community conversation, but inviting community in, period, so we can continue this piece of the conversation. And I have no problem with you holding me accountable on that, okay? Okay, all right.
Okay, can we take one last question before we go on the break?
Hello, my name is Tania Banks. I just have a question first. Can all the youth in the room raise your hand? The youth, the 18 through 24, the youth, just basically the youth. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. 6, 7. All right. So this is a big part of my point. I know I hear a lot about wanting to connect with the youth. My first question is for the youth. Before you got to OPP, I just wanted to know, did you feel like there was really any resources out there that help you do anything, you know, and improve your life? And for the people, the business people, my question is, what actions are you really taking to change this community for our youth?
The youth that I work with and I'm around every day, I just try to influence them to do what they see me doing instead of running the street. So they chasing the next tax-free dollar. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, they ain't gonna lead you nowhere but where you don't want to be. Where everybody tell you don't go. It's like growing up as a kid, your mother tell you don't touch the stove. You're not gonna touch it because it's hot. Yeah, I had role models, you would say. They're not really role models to me because they was doing illegal things, but they still had me doing the right thing. They would make sure I'm getting good grades, like where your report card at, or where your progress report. Give me a couple dollars in my pocket, go get some sneakers or something, or take my little sister to the mall or something. Like I had positive influence in my life. They just wasn't doing the right thing, you know what I mean? But they always kept me away from that, or tried to, until eventually I was at a point where I was homeless and I didn't have nobody, nothing. My mother was in the hospital, that's the only person I had. My little brother was in jail. I don't got no family out here really, so I had to man up and do what I had to do. And at the end of the day, it forced me to be in a predicament I didn't want to be in, but I gained like so much maturity, so much, my mental capacity is so crazy now just from having conversations with the youth, because I thought I had it hard, and I see this little man sleeping in the hallway. He like 14 years old, like, and he ended up dying down the street. He was working for OPP, ended up dying, and I'm like, if I could do this, I was homeless 3 times. I've been in the system since I was 13 years old. Gave it most of my life. I've been on papers like probation. I couldn't lead a state and do stuff that they was doing. They was going to Six Flags and stuff in school when I was going to school. I couldn't do that stuff because I had conditions, stipulations, and like I didn't want to see the people I'm around or the people that's raised around me to go through that. I didn't want to see them go through the same thing I went through. So I do what I can just to keep them away from that lifestyle, period. That's not the lifestyle. They see these music videos and these TV shows that's staged and they look real, so they think that's what it is, but it's not. I mean, they don't see the behind the scenes, what's really going on until it's too late. I mean, so I try to just break it down to them and tell them some personal stuff I've been through in life that got me in them predicaments, and what I'm doing is avoid them situations now. I mean, I just try to do it. I can.
Thank you. This conversation is so rich and important that we actually want to continue to engage in it for a little while longer, if that's all right. We still had some more hands up around the room, so.
Hi, Zoe Schwartz, CRT. My question is for Jen. How do the recidivism rates compare for the kids who are in this TRUE program to the rates before the program started? And also, what more can the DOC and community partners do to help these kids between 18 and 24 once they get out? I mean, I know there's not a ton of money anymore for community partners to engage these kids specifically coming out of corrections, but what more can we do just to be a resource?
So unfortunately, due to the fact that the unit is, so fresh, we don't have data or stats to reflect the recidivism regarding, those coming back. We have 9 in the community right now. We did have 2 that returned. However, they didn't have any new additional charges. They just had violations of their stipulations. So that's good on our end. The other aspect of it, as far as, these guys in the community that left the TRUE unit, they didn't complete the program, but they still keep in touch with us. They call us all the time. And that's unheard of for as far as DOC. They call for more information that they may need, or connections that we have that we can give them to where the cities that they're in. So it's actually refreshing to actually get the phone calls from them, knowing that, they're interested in talking to us still, keeping the connection, and they also like to inform our community as far as how well they're doing. As far as the other aspect of resources, right now, I mean, obviously we come from the same state, so we understand that there isn't any money out there. We are taking anything that we can as far as resources that are on a voluntary basis. And like I said with Dean, making the connections through, with Dean, he's able to provide us more connections with other cities as well. We did have OPP come into our community and speak with the guys, so it's also helpful for other agencies to come in if they're wanting to come in and talk and maybe form a relationship, so that when we have guys that are going to their areas, we can reach out to you and form that connection between the two.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brother Kelvin X. Lovejoy. I was running late this morning. First of all, I want to say that, respect to the panel, we had a very intense session last night, something called Barbershop Talks that we've been running around the city of Hartford. And last night's Barbershop Talk was dealing with education. And if you get a chance to go to Access TV, W4 News, you can definitely check that out. But just a couple of things. Dr. Martin Luther King was quoting Victor Hugo, and he said that when the soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. However, the guilty party is not he who commits the sin, but he who created the darkness. One of the main reasons why we struggle in the city of Hartford is because we keep trying to address a sin, but we never ever get to the root cause, which is the darkness that we have in our city. That's number one. Number two, we have to understand, and this came from Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu, who said that teacher expectation is one of the greatest impacts on the achievement gap in our educational system. If we expect for the children to achieve, they will achieve. However, on the flip side of that coin, and we talked about implicit bias, that if teachers expect children to fail, surely they will fail. I leave with this last piece, because I have 4 children, 3 of them who are college graduates. I'm raising this last one. He's a challenge, but we're gonna get there. I leave with this. I'm also the student minister at Muhammad's Mosque, number 14. So Brother Mario, you said if Malcolm was here, what would Malcolm be saying? I really couldn't tell you, but I will say this. That same spirit of Malcolm is alive and well in Hartford, And while they might want to put Malcolm on a stamp today, I'll tell you that those who hated Malcolm then still hate Malcolm, and they hated the message then, and guess what?
Good morning, my name is Veronica. My question is, the True Unit sounds amazing and everything, but what supports are being given to females? Their female rate is getting higher with DCF getting involved because their significant others are incarcerated, or they're not being educated about relationships and so on and so forth. So it's becoming more harder for them to get the education, finish high school, go to college. What is being offered, or what resources are being given to this population? Because the workforce is even harder for women, especially if you don't have credential, you don't have education or childcare. So what is being done for that support? I know we need it for the males, because we do, but as a female, what is being offered?
So we're expanding, and the female unit is going to be opening next month in June. So this same ideology is going to be there. Obviously, females are different, and we relate differently, so it's going to be geared for that. So that's the good news, and we will be expanding also with another unit with the males too. So.
Good morning. My name is Kim Flint. I'm with the Center for Latino Progress, and I actually just want to re-ask a question that this young lady asked earlier. It was a two-part question. The youth up here, Rodney and Crystale, we're wondering, like, where and when did you actually start to learn about youth services in Hartford, places that could help you? Because it sounds like it took a while, right? That maybe when you were 12 or 13, if you had known about some of these places, things could have been a little different along the way. And then the other side of the question is, what are we doing to make sure that our youth understand and know all of these resources exist? And I've actually been in some conversations about that recently, surrounding around data sharing. So it's great to share data, but I think the biggest issue is the collaboration and the willingness to work together. So I know that that's a lot of questions, but if we could answer them, that would be awesome.
Crystale, would you like to start with that question, please?
Crystale.
Sorry about that.
And I started the program when I was like 12, 13 with Dean, when I used to play basketball and stuff. And I thought it was like good because you never out here, you never find nobody that really care about you. Like, you have to really test them to see if they really care about you. Because some people just probably care about it at the moment because they probably getting paid for it, or somebody telling them to do it. But somebody like Dean, he did it because he wanted to. Even if he didn't have like enough for it, he'll make it happen. And I felt like he was real to me. So anything he asked me for or asked me to do, I do it because I know he's somebody that really care about me, and that not just playing with me and telling me anything that I want to hear. That's why I did the program, and I stayed in it because I feel like I could do something with this program, or even if I don't, with Dean help.
With me, I moved out here when I was 17 years old, 2011. I really didn't have nobody, so I went to my parole to guide me, give me guidance at least a little to where I should search for jobs. And he led me to Miss Kelly, and she gave me my first job in Hartford. And then I was exposed to the youth service programs that I was working with there. And that's how I found out about OPP. And then I didn't know they went up to 24 until I was recently incarcerated. I came home 18 months ago and just applied. They called me the next day, like, come in, we see what type of person you is, who I'm dealing with. Talk to them face to face, and I've been here ever since. Like, the reason I went there is like, jobs wouldn't give me a chance, except for if it's like a warehouse or some heavy lifting. I don't want to be just seen as muscle. I mean, I want to do more than that. I mean.
Okay, I have a question. So we all are community-based organizations here, and I see everybody asking, what is DOC doing? The topic is disrupting the cradle to prison pipeline. What are we doing to prevent the young people from going in prison? Because we already know what the prison is doing once they get there. What are we doing all holistically before they get there? Second, my question is to the Board of Education. We're talking about community organizations coming into the school in the future. What about those young people that's disconnected from the school that, supposed to be in school? How are you going to get those re-engaged into school? What's the plan for those young people? Because 9 times out of 10, the ones who are in school that make it to 10th grade and 11th grade, they're going to graduate. But what about my young people that's standing out on Park Street, Mather Street, that's not going to school, that the police is constantly watching from 8 o'clock in the morning because they waking up going to the Blues Package store on Barbara Street? What are we doing for these young people? And secondly, we have a panel. Where's HPD? Because they are also the problem of disrupting the cradle to prison pipeline. So why don't we have HPD on it? Because as you said, you yell back at a police officer, you're getting arrested from interfering with the police. So when are we going to change that? Please, somebody answer, help me.
It's a lot of rich conversation here in the room around what we need to do, and thank you, Brother Lovejoy, for really speaking about expectations, and that's what I was getting at, right? Like, our expectations for our kids now, we say we have high expectations, but I'm not sure that we do, and that's a big part of the issue. And you kind of answered your own question with your first question, which was, what are we doing prior to them coming to us, right? And when we look at our chronic absenteeism rates, right now we're up 3% compared to last year, and we're still down. We're still actually better at our attendance than we were 5 years ago. And what we're looking at is our main issues of attendance are our kindergarten kids and our 9th graders. And so we're seeing a disconnect between when they get from 8th grade to 9th grade. And part of that is the expectation that we have for our kids. We are at a point where we expect our staff, and I'm going to try to be eloquent but still be courageous in the conversation, right? Where, with the exception of law enforcement, and it's ironic, we expect our teachers to be cursed at times, touched, and work in environments that if you and I went to work and somebody cursed you out every single day, right? And so our expectations are still, I don't know, we're saying, we say we have high expectations, but we're not putting that into action because of some of the things that we allow. And not for the sake of understanding where that behavior comes, because it is deeply rooted and we need to get at the root cause of that. But we need to really, really explicitly say we have high expectations. Some of the behaviors that we allow, we wouldn't allow in our own home. And so that's part of it. And so how do we work with our young people in our community to say, hey, mom and dad, you're 18, 19 years old, right? You're coming from an environment that is traumatizing because of the conditions that have been created for you by this darkness that we put you in as a system and as a country. How can we help you resolve conflict, not get to the point where it's incentivized where the father's out, and if they come back in, then we take away your assistance. In the Domain 5 with the state, if you work, I do a little work with the state around Domain 5, which is our fatherhood initiative, and even our language is in there to help our fathers, and I'm proud of the young man who tried his best to make sure that he was in his daughter's life. No matter what the circumstances were. And so the answer is so layered. I'd love for me to stand here and say, hey, this is exactly what we need to do. If I did that, we'd be rich and Hartford would be fine tomorrow. But it's so layered that it's going to take everyone to really say, let's change our mindset around expectations. Let's really set the expectations high and believe that our kids can achieve them. Make that actionable through our policies, and we may have to do a policy review and analysis on what that looks like, and then build that community together. And it's a long answer because there is no right answer.
Thank you, Mario. I wanted to give Sergeant Austin an opportunity to respond to your question.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and I'm just be very brief. I don't have all the answers, but the answers are in this room. And we talk about law enforcement, what are they doing? You're right, a kid could be arrested for interfering with the police. That happens all the time. But what are we doing? I mean, that's the million-dollar question. We're always looking for someone to come right in and rescue this city. The answers for our solutions are right here among us. We need to look inside and develop that fortitude that Ms. Kelly was talking about when she talked about the professionals that lived in our community and didn't make some money and then ride out instead of bring it back and build it up. I never believed in busing. I never believed in the whole Project Concern, send your kid out to Weathersfield or Glastonbury where they really don't want you anyway. The answers are right here. I went to Fox Middle. I know the answers are here. The teachers are here. The professionals are here. This young man, this young woman, this whole panel, we can't look for the board to settle our problems. We don't hold them accountable because we don't hold ourselves accountable. As a law enforcement officer, I didn't like police as a kid growing up. I grew up in the 70s. We didn't have videos, cell phones, and Facebook and Snapchat to record all the terrible things that I saw. Believe me, they happened. And people always say, well, it wasn't me. That was a different generation. But the institutionalized things that happened then continue today. And the only way they can change is for guys and girls who look like me, who are from these communities, to take these jobs that belong to you rightfully. You talked about, do you have to be a Hartford resident? Hartford residents should get priority, but you don't have to be a Hartford resident. We want the best to teach our kids. We want the best for law enforcement. We want the best firefighters, but Hartford residents definitely should be given priority because it's your tax dollars first and foremost. Secondly, when we talk again about leadership and direction, which way we want to go, I see these problems with our kids. You're right. We have a surveillance system that you guys would not believe. We know what's going on in this city. We know what's going on. When they tell you Big Brother is watching, we are definitely watching. I mean, there's some constitutional things that we got to abide by, but we're definitely watching. But the thing is, hey, it's there. Hey, that's the reality. But I can tell you this. I look around the room, and Dean will tell you, and some of the other people who know, every Friday night, I'm a police officer. I have a family too, but every Friday night from 7 o'clock to 2 in the morning, I open up Quirk Middle School, feed kids pizza and water every Friday night. And these are the kids, wait a minute, these are the kids that have been kicked out of the Y, been kicked out of the Boys and Girls Club, been kicked out of every program in the city. We can't take them, they're just too bad. They're misunderstood. But they're not. They have never been, no one sat down and talked with them. I mean, I'm a cop, so they don't want to talk to me initially. But as they keep coming back, and they keep coming back, and they see the reality, just like this lady talked about Dean, they see when I'm coming with him, like, hey, next thing I know, they're following me around like I'm the Pied Piper. I'm like, well, why are you following me? Oh, I just want to help. What can I help you with, Sergeant Austin? What can I help you with? And I kick them out too. I say, hey, you got to go home tonight because you're acting up. But they don't even want to leave. They stand out in the courtyard. But they always come back next week, and I always welcome them back with open arms, ready to begin that conversation again. And Ms. Kelly has given us all the blueprint, because if we don't know our history, we don't know where we're going. You understand? And I'm not here to defend law enforcement. We do a lot of bad things, but there are a lot of good officers, and they could be even more better officers if they had empathetic views of a community that they serve, because that's what we're here to do, protect and serve. Just like the officers in Greenwich, Connecticut, the officers in Avon, Connecticut, the officers in Simsbury, Connecticut, their community feels protected. It feels as though their law enforcement provides a service. And that's what I want to do, and make sure our department continues to grow in that direction. Because if we don't, we're going to lose that generation, and that cradle to pipeline prison is going to continue because our schools are failing. I'm supposed to be over at Milner School right now. That's Vine Street School. That school is terrible condition. It's terrible condition. All right? The schools that they want to close, we want to keep them open for nostalgia. If we're going to keep them open, let's improve them. But let's improve the product that's going in, so that the best thing coming out is even better. You don't have to sit next to kids in Glastonbury to get smart or get educated. You just don't. I would compare my education against any student in the state, and I graduated from Weaver High School. I was going to say Hartford School, but Weaver High School. So I say that to say, it doesn't matter where you go. It matters what you want to do. And our kids, each one of us have a responsibility to mentor a youth somewhere along that line. That's the only way you're going to disrupt that, because like she said, I work on Project Longevity, and Project Longevity is basically an analytical data collection by John Jay College, so they know where to put those resources in the future, and they're not putting them here. All right? They're not putting them here. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, people. You always got to have a bad guy, and the bad guy just happens to always look like us. You understand? Y'all remember the Willie Horton ad? Think about it.
Thank you. We're going to let Chris respond, and then we're very grateful to have this panel, but we do need to let them get back to work at some point. So Chris respond, and then we'll take a quick break.
Well, briefly, the idea of expectations for our children, what are the expectations we have for ourselves? And Officer Austin talked about accountability. The way we hold each other accountable, frankly, is that we're in relationships with each other, and we're building community with each other. Transition has been spoken of a lot this morning, and there's been a lot of transitions, and those transitions are interruptions in our ability to form lasting communities. And things that I've seen in the neighborhoods that have made a difference are the anchors in the neighborhood, where transitions aren't happening. The agency or the group or the community is there and they're staying there. Ebony Horsewomen, the Artist Collective, right? There's some stability, and there's the opportunity for transgenerational participation. That sense of community can be built around. You know, one of the things that the kids in the gangs used to say was that they were down for each other 24/7, 365. Well, we need to meet and match that commitment to each other and to our kids, because programs can be defunded. Different things can go out of business or go out of existence. But if we have each other's back and we build a sense of community, that can't be taken away from us.
And I just wanted to touch on the how as well. We know the needs and certain things that as a youth you need to, milestones you need to hit while you're growing up, from the time you're in the womb all the way up to 24. And we all provide services up and down that spectrum there. So we need to decide, again, we need to take a look at what's needed within those areas. And then going back to what this young lady said is the I statement. What am I going to do as a community member, as a community-based organization, as a faith-based organization, as the city? Once we piece all of those things together, that's the plan. And programs can come and go, but we know exactly from ages 0 to 3 what needs to happen to make sure that you're more likely to be successful from ages 10 to 20. We know that information. So now it's time for us to put things into action and lay that out, and then decide as an organization, as a person, where do we fit within that spectrum, and put into motion. So from there, we're going to move on to lunch or something. Is it lunch?
Eventually. Not
Eventually.
Yet. We have
Okay.
no lunch yet. This has been incredibly valuable. We all appreciate you taking time and speaking your truth and letting us be part of your knowledge. And I want to give a big round of applause to our panel. Thank you so much. This is the beginning of a conversation that we're going to continue to have with the folks in this room, and hopefully some of you as well. We're going to take a short break in 1 minute, and if you guys can hang out during the break.